The richest cowboy in Montana crossed a furious crowd, took the town's most hated woman by the hand, and spoke 4 words that made every voice fall silent. A rope swung from a man's fist. Dust stung Naomi's eyes. Somewhere behind her, a frightened horse screamed and kicked against a wagon wheel. The crowd surged forward, then stopped. Heavy bootsteps crossed the square. Wyatt Granger pushed through the bodies, reached for her hand, and held it as if he'd already made up his mind. No one spoke. No one moved. And Naomi suddenly realized the real danger had only just begun. If you're drawn to stories of courage, love, and second chances, come right along with us. The summer wind came across the Montana prairie, carrying dust from the dry hills beyond Cedar Creek. It rattled fence posts, lifted loose straw from wagon beds, and swept through the narrow streets of Dry Cedar Crossing as if searching for something it had lost years ago. Naomi Carter stood beside the creek with her sleeves rolled above her elbows, washing blood from her hands after treating a ranch horse with a torn leg. The horse belonged to a man who rarely looked her in the eye. Still, he had come. People always came when they needed help. They just didn't stay afterward. Naomi packed away her bandages and small glass bottles of herbs into an old leather satchel. The stitching on the bag was wearing thin. She had repaired it herself 3 times already. Across the water, children played near the cottonwood trees. Their laughter drifted through the warm air until one mother spotted Naomi and called them back toward town. The children obeyed. They always did. Naomi watched them go and said nothing. 8 years had taught her that silence lasted longer than arguments. By noon, Dry Cedar Crossing was crowded for the annual summer festival. Wagons lined the main street. Ranchers traded cattle receipts. Women carried pies wrapped in cloths. A fiddler played beneath a canvas awning outside Miller's General Store. Naomi had no reason to attend, but she needed lamp oil and coffee. The moment she stepped onto Main Street, conversations shifted. Not stopped. Shifted. That was somehow worse. She heard her name whispered once, then twice. A woman near the bakery looked away first. A man beside the hitching rail pretended not to notice her. Naomi kept walking. Years ago, after the mysterious fire destroyed several barns on the north side of town, people needed someone to blame. Her father had been accused. No proof was ever found. The accusation remained anyway. The fire died. The rumor survived. Near the center of town, children gathered around a decorated wagon pulled by a large chestnut horse. Someone lit a string of festival firecrackers. The first pops echoed sharply. The horse's ears snapped back. Another burst followed. The animal reared. Screams erupted instantly. The reins slipped from the driver's hands. The wagon lurched sideways. A little girl tumbled from the rear platform and landed directly in front of the horse. Everything happened at once. People shouted. Women cried out. The horse struck the ground with its front hooves and surged forward. Naomi dropped her satchel. Before anyone else moved, she ran. Dust exploded beneath her boots. She reached the child, grabbed her beneath the arms, and threw herself sideways. The horse thundered past only a few feet away. The little girl burst into tears. Naomi held her until the danger passed. For one brief moment, the entire street was silent. Then somebody spoke. If she hadn't come here today, none of this would have happened. The words spread quickly. Others joined in. Always the same. Always easier than gratitude. Naomi slowly stood. The little girl's mother rushed forward and pulled her daughter away without a thank you. A few men began moving closer. One of them stepped into Naomi's path. Another folded his arms. The atmosphere shifted. Naomi recognized it immediately, the way a storm announces itself before the first drop of rain. Then a horse stopped nearby. Heavy boots struck the ground. The crowd parted without being asked. Wyatt Granger walked forward. Tall, broad-shouldered, dust from the trail still clinging to his coat. The owner of Granger Ridge Ranch, the richest cowboy in 3 counties. The kind of man people listened to even when he barely spoke. His eyes moved from the crowd to Naomi, then to the men surrounding her. Without a word, he stepped beside her. His hand closed gently around hers. Not possessive, not hesitant, certain. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. Wyatt looked at the crowd. She's with me. Nothing more. Just 4 words. Yet nobody answered. Nobody challenged him. Nobody moved. Naomi stared at the stranger holding her hand, and for the first time in years, she saw something she barely recognized. Not acceptance, not safety, just the smallest glimpse of possibility, the kind that can change a life, if you're brave enough to follow it. Naomi barely remembered leaving the festival. One moment she had been standing in the middle of Main Street, with half the town staring at her. The next, she was riding beside Wyatt Granger, beneath a sky turning gold with late afternoon light. Neither of them spoke much. Dry Cedar Crossing slowly disappeared behind them. The road to Granger Ridge Ranch followed Cedar Creek for several miles before climbing toward higher ground. Cottonwoods lined the water. Grass bent in the warm breeze. Far ahead, cattle moved across the hills like scattered shadows. Naomi kept waiting for Wyatt to explain himself. He never did. When the ranch house finally came into view, she saw a place built by work instead of pride. The main house was large but plain. The barns were repaired rather than replaced. Every fence line stood straight. Every gate worked. The ranch felt lived in. Wyatt dismounted first. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said. Naomi frowned. "Why?" "Because you need somewhere quiet." That was all. No speech, no conditions, no explanation. It somehow made her trust him even less. People always wanted something, sooner or later. The next morning she found a cup of coffee waiting on the kitchen table. Still hot. No note, no conversation. Just coffee. By sunrise, Wyatt was already outside working alongside his ranch hands. Naomi watched through the window. The richest man in the valley spent his morning repairing a broken gate with a hammer in one hand and nails in the other. That surprised her. The surprises continued. 3 days later, Wyatt showed her a horse suffering from a stubborn infection, a valuable breeding stallion. The animal had stopped eating. Several men had already given up hope. Naomi spent hours cleaning the wound, changing bandages, and mixing herbs she carried in small cloth packets. She returned the next day, then the day after. A week later, the stallion was walking again. The stable hands noticed. So did Wyatt. He simply nodded once when he saw the horse eating. For some reason, that meant more than praise. Not everyone approved. Curtis Doyle certainly didn't. The ranch manager had worked for Wyatt longer than anyone else. His gray mustache twitched whenever Naomi entered a room. One evening, she overheard him speaking near the feed shed. "You don't know her?" Wyatt's voice remained calm. "No, I don't." "Then why trust her?" A long pause followed. Naomi stopped beside the wall and listened. Finally, Wyatt answered, "Because nobody else does." Curtis muttered something under his breath and walked away. Naomi stood motionless. She wasn't sure what unsettled her more. The argument, or Wyatt's answer. Summer drifted toward autumn. The days became cooler. The ranch settled into its routines. Then the storm came. Dark clouds rolled over the western mountains just before sunset. Lightning flashed across distant ridges. By midnight, part of the Granger herd had become trapped inside a narrow canyon where flash floods sometimes formed. The ranch hands scrambled for horses. Lanterns swung wildly in the wind. Without being asked, Naomi saddled her mare. Wyatt noticed. "You don't have to come. I'm aware of that." Something almost like amusement touched the corner of his mouth. They rode into the darkness together. Rain struck their coats. Thunder echoed through the canyon walls. For hours they worked beside each other, guiding frightened cattle toward higher ground. No grand speeches, no dramatic moments, just mud, rain, cold hands, hard work. Near dawn, the last of the herd finally cleared the canyon. Both horses stood steaming in the morning chill. Naomi pushed wet hair from her face. Wyatt handed her his canteen. She hesitated, then accepted it. Their eyes met briefly. Neither looked away first. The silence felt different now. Not uncomfortable, not cautious. Simply shared. Later that week, while searching through an old storage room near the ranch office for medical supplies, Naomi discovered a stack of forgotten ledgers covered in dust. Most were ordinary. Feed purchases, livestock records, land taxes. Then one thin notebook caught her attention. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed. As she opened it, a familiar date immediately caught her eye. The year of the fire. Her pulse slowed, then quickened again. Because someone had written notes about the very night that changed her family's life forever. And for the first time in years, Naomi began to wonder if the truth had been hiding much closer than anyone realized. She carried the ledger back to her room and lit a kerosene lamp. Outside, the ranch had gone quiet. A few distant voices drifted from the bunkhouse. Somewhere beyond the corrals, a horse stamped against the earth. Naomi sat at the small wooden desk beside the window and carefully opened the book. The pages smelled of dust and age. Several entries were ordinary. Feed deliveries, payroll records, receipts for lumber shipments. Then she found something strange. 3 separate purchases of lamp oil and timber had been recorded just days before the fire that destroyed part of Dry Cedar Crossing. The quantities were unusually large, and beside each transaction appeared the same name: Milton Crow. Naomi stared at the words. Judge Milton Crow, the most respected man in town, the man who sat in the front pew every Sunday, the man who seemed to have a hand in nearly every land agreement along Cedar Creek. The lamp flame flickered. For a long moment she simply listened to the wind tapping against the window. Then she turned another page. Her pulse quickened. Several ranch owners had sold portions of their property within months after the fire. Every sale eventually connected back to land controlled by Milton Crow. Naomi closed the ledger. The room suddenly felt smaller. The next morning, she rode into town alone. She stopped first at the county records office. The clerk barely looked up when she entered. Dust floated through sunlight near the front window. Old maps hung on the walls. After nearly an hour of searching public documents, Naomi found exactly what she feared. The names matched. Properties lost after the fire. Water rights transferred later. Crow's signature appeared again and again, like footprints crossing fresh snow. By the time she stepped back onto Main Street, the sun stood high overhead. The drought had tightened its grip on the valley. Dust swirled along the boardwalks. Even Cedar Creek looked lower than usual. People were beginning to worry, and worried people made dangerous decisions. On her ride back toward Granger Ridge, Naomi noticed another rider behind her, then a second, then a third. She told herself it was nothing. Travelers used these roads every day. Still, she loosened the reins slightly. The riders continued gaining ground. Her horse shifted nervously beneath her. The road narrowed where cottonwoods lined the creek. Suddenly, one rider urged his horse forward. "Miss Carter." The voice carried across the dry grass. Naomi didn't stop. Neither did they. The men moved closer. One pointed toward the satchel hanging beside her saddle. "We just want the book." Her stomach tightened. The ledger. Without thinking, she kicked her horse into a faster pace. The riders followed. Hooves pounded against the dirt road. Dust exploded behind them. The creek flashed beside her through the trees. For several tense moments, the distance closed. Then another sound reached them. A different horse. Coming fast. Very fast. The riders glanced back. Wyatt Granger appeared over the rise. His black horse cut through the dust like a storm rolling across open country. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't need to. The men slowed immediately. One curse drifted through the air. Another rider turned away. Within seconds, all three disappeared toward the hills. The road fell silent again. Wyatt reached Naomi and brought his horse alongside hers. "You all right?" She nodded. "Barely." His eyes moved toward the satchel, then back to her face. "What did you find?" For a moment, Naomi considered lying, keeping the burden to herself. Instead, she handed him the ledger. Wyatt read several pages while sitting in the saddle. His expression changed little, but something hardened behind his eyes. When he finished, he closed the book slowly. "This isn't small." "No. Neither is the man whose name keeps appearing." The wind pushed across the valley. Naomi looked toward the distant town. "Do you think my father knew?" Wyatt didn't answer immediately. He removed his hat and brushed dust from the brim. Then he looked at her. "I think your father may have known enough to become a problem." The words settled heavily between them. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, Wyatt reached for the reins of her horse and guided it gently toward the ranch road. Not because she needed help, not because he thought she was weak, just because someone had frightened her today, and he knew it. The gesture was small, almost nothing. Yet Naomi felt it more than any speech. For the first time since arriving at Granger Ridge, she stopped wondering why Wyatt had stepped into that crowd at the festival. The answer no longer seemed important. What mattered was this. When trouble came, he stayed. That evening, long after sunset, Naomi returned to the storage room searching for anything connected to the ledger. Most boxes contained ordinary records. Then she discovered a narrow wooden case hidden behind a shelf. Inside lay a folded envelope covered in dust. The handwriting stopped her cold. She recognized it instantly. Her father's. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the yellowed paper. The letter had never been mailed. And the first sentence changed everything. "If anyone is reading this, Judge Milton Crow knows exactly how the fire began." Naomi sat frozen beside the lamp. The flame trembled slightly in the glass chimney. Outside, the night wind moved through the cottonwoods near the creek. She kept reading. Her father's handwriting remained steady across every page. He described warehouse deliveries that never appeared in official records. He described meetings held after dark. He described men buying land from desperate families before the fire had even happened. Most importantly, he described Milton Crow, not as a respected judge, not as a civic leader, but as a man preparing to profit from ruin. By dawn, Naomi had finished the letter. She carried it downstairs where Wyatt was already drinking coffee at the kitchen table. A ranch ledger lay open beside him. Morning light spilled through the window behind his shoulder. Without speaking, Naomi handed him the letter. Wyatt read every word. When he finished, he stared out toward the corrals for a long time. "The whole thing was planned," Naomi said quietly. His jaw tightened. "Looks that way." The days that followed felt different. Too many people suddenly seemed interested in Naomi's movements. Conversations stopped when she entered stores. Riders appeared on roads where nobody usually traveled. Even Curtis Doyle looked uneasy. One evening, he approached Wyatt outside the barn. "You need to be careful." Wyatt looked up. Curtis shifted uncomfortably. "I don't trust Crow." It was the closest thing to an apology Naomi had ever heard from him. Then the rumors began. They spread through Dry Cedar Crossing faster than drought. People whispered that Naomi intended to take ownership of Granger Ridge Ranch. Others claimed she was manipulating Wyatt. Some blamed her for every hardship facing the valley. Every day the stories grew larger. Every day the truth seemed harder to reach. One afternoon, Naomi packed the letter, the ledger, and several supporting documents into a leather satchel. She planned to deliver everything to the county sheriff's office, the evidence needed to leave the ranch. Wyatt wanted to ride with her. She refused. "It's only a few miles." He wasn't convinced. Neither was she. Still, she left before sunrise. The road wound south through dry grass and low hills. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then everything did. Near a narrow pass between sandstone ridges, several riders emerged from behind a rock outcropping. Their faces were hidden beneath hats. Their intentions were not. Naomi turned her horse immediately. The men closed the distance. A shout echoed behind her. Then another. Her mare ran hard, too hard. The satchel bounced against her side. A rope suddenly stretched across part of the trail. The horse stumbled. Naomi hit the ground. The world spun. By the time she regained her bearings, the riders were already surrounding her. One reached for the satchel. Another grabbed the reins. The last thing Naomi saw before darkness claimed the afternoon was the leather strap of her bag disappearing into someone's hands. Hours later, back at Granger Ridge, Wyatt stood in the stable yard holding Naomi's horse. The mare had returned alone. Mud covered her legs. One stirrup hung empty. The ranch fell silent. Curtis removed his hat. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Wyatt's face turned pale beneath the dust. For the first time since Naomi had met him, she wasn't there. And for the first time since that day in town, he looked afraid, truly afraid. Before sunset, Wyatt saddled his horse. 4 loyal ranch hands joined him. Among them was Hank Mercer, the oldest man on the ranch, the one who had helped raise Wyatt after his father's death. Storm clouds gathered over the Badlands to the east. Lightning flickered far beyond the hills. Wyatt checked his rifle, mounted his horse, and looked toward the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, Naomi was waiting. And Judge Milton Crow had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Somewhere out there, Naomi was waiting. And Judge Milton Crow had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The storm reached the Badlands shortly after midnight. Rain swept across the broken hills in long gray sheets. Lightning flashed over distant ridges. The narrow trails turned slick beneath the horses' hooves. Wyatt rode at the front. Hank Mercer stayed close behind him. No one spoke much. Every rider understood what was at stake. Near dawn, they found the first sign, a torn piece of leather from Naomi's satchel caught on a sagebrush branch. Wyatt dismounted immediately. His fingers closed around it. For a moment, he simply stared. Then he climbed back into the saddle. "She's alive," he said quietly. No one questioned how he knew. They kept moving. The trail led deeper into the hills until the remains of an abandoned silver mine appeared through the rain. Weather-beaten buildings leaned against the slope. Broken ore carts sat rusting beside old tracks. A lantern glowed inside one of the structures. Wyatt's jaw tightened. They had found her. Inside the largest building, Naomi sat tied to a wooden chair. Her wrists ached. The room smelled of wet timber and cold ashes. Across from her stood Judge Milton Crow. His expensive coat looked strangely out of place among the crumbling walls. "You should have left the past buried," he said. Naomi lifted her head. "The truth doesn't stay buried forever." Crow gave a humorless smile. It already has for 10 years. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Then another sound followed. Horse hooves. Crow heard them too. His expression changed. One of his men rushed through the doorway. "They're here!" Everything moved quickly after that. Crow cursed under his breath and ordered his men outside. The old mine erupted with confusion. Shouts echoed through the rain. Horses screamed. Men ran between buildings. Naomi heard Wyatt's voice somewhere beyond the storm. Not loud, not frightened, certain, the way he always sounded. A few minutes later, the door burst open. Wyatt stepped inside. Rainwater ran from the brim of his hat. For 1 second, neither of them moved. Then he crossed the room and cut the ropes from her wrists. "You hurt?" Naomi tried to stand. Her legs nearly gave out. Wyatt caught her arm before she could fall. The gesture lasted only a second. "Long enough. I've been better," she admitted. Relief flickered across his face. Gone almost immediately. Outside, another shout echoed through the storm. Then came a gunshot somewhere near the mine entrance. The sound seemed to freeze the entire hillside. Wyatt looked toward the door. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He and Naomi hurried outside. The rain had begun to ease. Gray morning light spread slowly across the hills. Near the old ore tracks, several riders stood gathered around someone lying on the ground. Wyatt pushed forward, then stopped. Hank Mercer looked up from the mud. His breathing was shallow. The old ranch hand managed a faint smile. "Found her, didn't you?" Wyatt dropped to one knee. For the first time since Naomi had known him, he looked helpless. Hank's weathered hand found Wyatt's sleeve. "You did good, son." The words barely carried above the wind. Then his gaze shifted toward Naomi. "Take care of him." Naomi swallowed hard. The old man nodded once, as if satisfied. The rain continued falling softly around them. No one spoke. No one moved. The storm passed overhead. And when it was gone, Hank Mercer was gone too. Hours later, they returned to Granger Ridge Ranch. The sky had cleared. The valley looked unchanged. But everything felt different. Workers removed their hats as Hank's horse walked riderless through the front gate. No one needed an explanation. That evening, Wyatt sat alone on the porch. A cup of coffee cooled beside him untouched. The mountains glowed red beneath the setting sun. Naomi stepped outside quietly. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, she sat beside him. Not too close, not too far away. The silence between them felt heavier than any argument. "I should have gotten there sooner," Wyatt said. Naomi looked toward the horizon. "You came." His hands tightened around the coffee cup. Hank didn't. The words hung between them. Neither had an answer. As darkness settled across the ranch, Naomi understood something she had tried not to admit. Somewhere between the long rides, the quiet mornings, the storms, and the small acts of kindness, Wyatt Granger had become more than the man who saved her in town. And judging by the look in his eyes whenever he thought she wasn't watching, she wasn't the only one carrying that truth. The next morning, before sunrise, a rider arrived from Dry Cedar Crossing, carrying a printed notice. Judge Milton Crow had called a public meeting at the church. Every rancher, every merchant, every family, the entire town was expected to attend. Wyatt read the notice once, then handed it to Naomi. She scanned the final line, a hearing regarding the future safety and prosperity of Dry Cedar Crossing. Both of them understood what it really meant. Milton Crow was preparing to turn the entire town against her one last time. And maybe that's what makes this story linger long after the dust settles. Not the accusations, not the secrets, not even the fight for the truth. It's the choice that came afterward. Because there comes a moment in every life when the road forks in front of you. One path leads back toward old wounds, old fears, and the people who told you who you were. The other leads somewhere unknown. If you were standing where Naomi stood, carrying years of hurt that never truly belonged to you, would you have found the strength to stay? Would you have trusted someone enough to build a future beside them? And if you were Wyatt, would you have risked your reputation, your fortune, and the life you built for the sake of one person who deserved to be seen for who she really was? Maybe that's the quiet lesson hidden beneath all those Montana skies. Healing rarely arrives all at once. It comes in small things, a hand that stays, a promise that doesn't need fancy words, a place where you finally belong. Sometimes love isn't about rescuing someone. Sometimes it's about walking beside them until they remember they no longer have to walk alone. I'd love to know what part of Naomi and Wyatt's journey stayed with you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this make your evenings a little warmer, I hope you'll stay a while. There are more trails ahead, more forgotten hearts, more frontier stories waiting beyond the next sunrise.